Hello there. Thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of the primary election 2024. My name is Bobby Lussier, and I will be the moderator for this program. Town Meeting TV is hosting a series of forums here in advance of the August 13th primary, inviting candidates in contested races to come in and share their views and what they've been hearing from voters on the issues that matter to our community. And on tonight's program, we'll be hearing from two candidates running for the Democratic nomination for Chittenden 17's House seat. And those two candidates are Abbey Duke and Missa Aloisi. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks. Thank you.
Awesome. So we've prepared a list of questions for you that you have each received. You'll have 90 seconds to answer each question. We also invite you, if you're tuning in live, to call in at 802-862-3966. You can call in and we will do our best to prioritize your question, though we will screen calls to ensure that no questions are repeated and to make sure that your question is directed at both of the candidates here and not just at one candidate in particular. Okay, so with that, let's get started with 1-minute opening statements, and we'll start with you, Abbey Duke, your opening statement, why you're running and what qualifies you to serve as state rep.
Great. Thank you, Bobby, and thank you for hosting this. My name is Abbey Duke. I was appointed to the legislature in the spring and served at the sort of tail end of the term, finishing out the term, and now I'm running for a full term. I've lived in the old and new North Ends for over 25 years. I live in the Village Green neighborhood with my wife and 2 kids, an incoming 9th grader and 11th grader. I've spent the last 20 years building my business, Sugar Snap Catering, and I know what it's like to start a business from scratch and build it to a successful enterprise. I've employed over 100 employees over the years, and I want to bring I think my skills, my experience, and my temperament are well matched for the legislature, and I want to use my skills to help further economic development and small businesses in the state, and advocate for our district.
Thank you so much, Abbey. Missa Aloisi, your opening statement.
Hi, I'm Missa Aloisi, and I'm running for the House representative spot because I believe there needs to be more people like myself in the House. I am a queer parent of a 10 and 7-year-old. I'm also a sole entrepreneur. I started my architecture practice 11 years ago to make design services affordable and approachable to homeowners. And I truly believe that everybody needs to have access to design, and that's why I started it. Every day I go into people's homes and I ask them, what do they need and how can I help? And I see this role as no different than that. I've been in the profession 20 years, and I've really trained my ear to listen deeply to my clients. And I will do the same with my constituents. I've also served on the Burlington's Development Review Board and Montpelier's Planning Commission. So I know what it takes to develop a community and also maintain a community. So I hope to bring that unique skill set to my constituents.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for running and also for being here tonight to talk about the issues. Really appreciate it. We'll start with our first question, which is on the top of many folks' minds, especially now as the tax bills roll in. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. So how will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year as a legislator? And we'll start with you, Missa Aloisi.
Yeah, education funding and property taxes very complex, and I believe it doesn't need to be as complex as it is. I think in its complexity it kind of brings a barrier for people accessing how it's done. But there's 3 sort of ways that I would approach that, and the first is we really kind of need to move away from a property-based revenue into an income-based revenue. And we also, the second thing is to protect the pupil weights. In Burlington, we have a higher proportion of English learners in poverty, so we need to really kind of maintain and protect those weights. And then also, I would like to see a reinstatement of the school construction aid. In 2007, it was kind of put on ice, and Burlington sort of feeling the pressure from that this year with our property taxes being raised. If there was a fund available for when there was emergency care or maintaining, we have, I think, the second oldest school infrastructure in the country. So towns throughout the state will have to renovate, and if we had that aid program again, then we would have towns would have a little bit more flexibility in their school budgets when they need to do renovation projects.
Thank you so much. Abbey Duke, your thoughts on property taxes and education?
Absolutely. So when I've been out talking to neighbors and knocking on doors, a very top priority of our neighbors is the continuing escalation of property taxes, and really just the fact that our bills are becoming more unaffordable across the board. So it's not just property taxes, but property taxes is an easy one to focus on. I think a top priority for the legislature this year needs to be a fundamental restructuring of our education financing system, as well as looking at the way we structure the delivery of education services. We have a system that we've kind of continually been putting Band-Aids on, and it is cumbersome, it is complex, there are not incentives. A neighbor put it really well. It's too easy to spend too much. The way the system works right now is school boards from across the state, by the way, there are over 100 school districts, I believe, and 58 supervisory unions in our state of 645,000 people. So all of these different school boards do their very best, and I think they're approaching it with the needs of their students and their community in mind, and they build their budgets. But then in aggregate, all those budgets go to the state, and they kind of go through the formulas, and the tax rates get spun out of that. And that is just much too complex, and as my neighbor said, it's too easy to spend too much. So the legislature, with the yield bill, created a commission on the future of Vermont's education, and I looked at my time is up, but I'm very excited to see what they come up with, and I think there's going to be a lot of political will to take action this year in Montpelier.
Thank you both so much. Recognize that we're asking big questions
Yeah.
and giving you a very small amount of time. So thank you both for bearing with us, and feel free to just come to the close of your thought or sentence as we reach time. Let's talk about another tax issue here. Let's talk about progressive tax initiatives. So this year, Democrats in the House proposed new taxes on the state's highest earners and largest assets, including an increased income tax on earners over $500,000, an increased property transfer tax on properties over $750,000, and an increased corporate income tax. And these are to fund things like more housing, the judiciary system expansion, and the expansion of Medicaid. Do you support raising taxes on, I should say that a lot of these were passed in the House, but did not ultimately make it through the Senate. Do you support raising taxes on high earners and wealthy Vermonters? And we'll start with you, Abbey.
So I very much support progressive taxation, and I support everybody paying their fair share. I think that these proposals in the House and in the legislature this year were perhaps a bit too ambitious. There were a lot of tax proposals on the table, and I think that we need to look at them with a very careful eye and certainly consider them. So in theory, yes, absolutely I support taxing higher earners at a higher marginal rate, but I just think we have to be really careful about unintended consequences, and really the devil's in the details, so we just need to be really careful about it.
Thanks, Abbey. Missa, your thoughts on progressive tax initiatives?
Yeah, I think those were brought to the legislation with the help of the Progressive Party as well. I don't think it was just solely a Democratic initiative. It was working in tandem with the progressives. And yes, I would support that tax initiative to have a fair share. People pay their fair share over the past, 3-4 years in particular. We've seen an influx of out-of-staters coming into the state, bringing New York and Boston salaries into the state, and pricing Vermonters out of their homes. And so right now, we're dealing with a community that is property rich but income poor in my own neighbors. So we really need to tap into this revenue that we have not tapped into in order to help with our education and school construction and school budgets.
Thank you both. Let's move on to housing. This past session, Democrats also passed a bill that would spend an additional $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This level of investment also was not passed in the Senate. The question here is, would you support this level of public investment in housing? And as a follow-on here, this larger question that we're dealing with in Montpelier, is our housing crisis due more to regulatory failure in Act 250, or is it more about underinvestment? And, or if it is both, then what's the balance to strike here? And we'll start with you, Missa.
Yeah, sure. I do support the initiative for that level of spending. As for why we are in crisis, I think I like to picture it as, I like to use metaphors as a stool, and there's sort of these three legs of the stool. The first one is it's been underfunded for years and years and years, and then we have not built. The second leg is we have not built the housing for years and years and years, so we have a lack of housing. And then the third leg is we need to keep it affordable. If one of those is not getting equal attention, then the stool becomes unsteady, and that's what we're finding here in our state. I also believe that there are interesting ways that we could look at public investment in affordable housing. In other states, hospitals, for example, have taken profit and invested in housing. There's a connection between health and housing. And if we house the ones who are in most critical need of housing, you reduce the operational costs of a hospital. So it's not a separate issue, housing and healthcare. It could even be connected. And that there's other ways to get public investment for housing.
Thank you, Missa. Abbey, your thoughts on housing?
Absolutely. I know these are very big questions.
They are.
So housing is a crisis in our state, in our city, and in our state, and it's taken decades to get there. And it is I guess the question about the cause, it's really all of the above. And I think we need to use every tool that we can find, every tool in the toolbox to address it. So that includes looking at regulations, it includes looking at funding, looking at increased funding, looking at creative ways to create more housing, to create more home share type opportunities. I mean, I just think it takes everybody coming to the table and coming up with every creative idea we have.
Thanks so much. Now we'll move on to a related question. This question of emergency shelter that was also front and center in the budget this year. So Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023. So that's up, it's nearly tripled from the amount of folks experiencing homelessness in 2020. This summer, the state is rolling back its pandemic era shelter capacity, emergency shelter capacity across the state as those federal funds dry up, which is pushing hundreds more Vermonters to live on the streets. The question, how will you approach the need for emergency shelter specifically, and how should the state pay for it? And we'll start with you, Abbey.
So when we think about long-term solutions for homelessness, it's about housing, right? So the data seems pretty clear that communities with very expensive housing have much more homelessness. So we need housing. We need to look at housing for the long-term solution and medium-term solution. In the short run, we have a humanitarian crisis. I mean, we have thousands of people living on the streets, and it in particular in places like Burlington, Rutland, community hubs, more urban type environments where people are gathering, and the state needs to step up and help house these people in exactly how to pay for it, I don't know. But we need to look at all these funding, all these interesting funding ways, and maybe it's a short-term infusion of cash to handle the short-term housing needs and really emergency housing needs while building the housing. But the state needs, it should not be the city. The city is expected to solve the problem. The state needs to play a much bigger role.
Thank you, Abbey. Missa, your thoughts on emergency shelter?
Yeah, it's a topic dear and near to my heart. I've had a relative homeless before, and ex's child homeless before, and so bringing the dignity back to people who are struggling is really important. And the criteria for which you have to hit to get into emergency shelter the bar keeps getting lower and lower and lower. So the people who really can get into emergency shelters are the elderly and the sick. We also need to create a variety of shelter options. I think the biggest problem with certain shelters is people who are struggling with mental health. It's not a good environment for them, and they often would prefer to be on the street versus in a shelter. So it's in the design of the shelters themselves. I think there are some solutions to maintain people to want to be in a shelter and then to move on to transitional housing and then into something else. But then also to pay for it. I mean, I brought it up before, but the fair share is a way to increase revenue in the state. And I think it is a viable way to increase revenue in the state. But we need to, again, raise the bar and then look at a variety of sheltering options, not just a single solution.
Thank you both very much. A reminder that you can call in. We're about 15 minutes left here. You can call in at 802-862-3966, and we'll put your question live on the air, and you can ask directly the two candidates here running for the Democratic nomination for the Chittenden 17 House seat. We will now move on to, I'm going to jump to the question number 7 here about criminal justice, and we'll get to the overdose crisis if we have time. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What are your priorities, each of your priorities, to advance public safety and criminal justice in Vermont? And we'll start with Missa.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to, remember is that sentencing doesn't deter behavior, and that we really need to look at the solutions beforehand to deter behavior, and that's increased visibility and the restorative justice. So that way we get, I think about people who are in crisis, and if they had shelter and housing, would they make different choices? There's also, the raise the age is also important. We know for a fact that our brains keep developing into your 20s, and yet we are inching up that age very slowly. So we are holding people accountable and sentencing them before they really know what they're actually doing or making the right decisions. I know for a fact the person who I know is homeless also got into trouble and made some bad choices. And the public defender in his case was able to, secure housing for this person and deter the sentence for them. So we know, so I know for a fact that it helps turn around somebody's behavior and move them in the right direction.
Thanks so much, Missa. Abbey, your thoughts on criminal justice and public safety?
Absolutely. So, in talking to people in our district, public safety is high on their list of concerns. They're concerned about feeling safe when they're downtown. They're concerned about petty theft in our neighborhoods. They're concerned about the backlog of cases in the judicial system. So again, very complex question, but I think some priorities need to be even more resources to help reduce the backlog in the judicial system. We need to look at how can we provide some more resources or help cities with response times, because people are not feeling safe and they're also not feeling heard, like if they call the police, and whether it's a police officer or a social worker, some kind of a response to help with that response, to help people feel more safe in going downtown and going out in their neighborhoods. I was pleased in the legislature during the veto session to vote to help override the bill to override the veto of the bill that was expanding restorative justice into more areas of the state and more resources for restorative justice. I think that is very important. So criminal justice reform there's many facets to it, but I think some priorities in the near term are to look at the judicial backlog and also to look at how can we help the relationships between the courts, the police, and the prosecutor's offices, also to help move things along.
Thank you both. We'll now jump back to this question about the overdose crisis. Yep. In 2023, 231 people died from an overdose in Vermont, with 95% of those overdoses involving fentanyl. What must be done to prevent overdoses and promote addiction recovery in Vermont? And we'll start with you, Abbey.
Again, complicated question. Housing, again, becomes a very important piece. I mean, I will say I have a child that goes to Burlington High School. Another one will start next year. And she would come home from school and talk about, the high school kids know what it looks like when, people are using drugs. They see people using drugs downtown and in different areas. And it is very clear that we need many more services, and we need really all of it. We need harm reduction. We need the Overdose Prevention Center to open, another really important bill that the legislature was able to override, so that we will have a pilot project in Burlington. We need many more treatment beds. We need outreach. I mean, I think this is, again, another crisis that we really need every tool in the toolbox being implemented to help people, because it's another crisis that we have.
Thanks, Abbey. Missa?
Yeah. So I'm not very far removed from the crisis. I see it on a daily basis. I live in the Old North End. I live right across the street from the number 2 fire station. And over the past 12 years, I've gotten to know the firefighters and first responders quite well. And I remember there was one weekend last summer where all the trucks kept going out on a minute basis. And I said, how's it going over there? And he said, oh, we had 90 plus overdoses this weekend. And so the resources that go into those response calls are enormous. So not only I'm very pleased that the bill passed and we're getting an overdose prevention site, but we need to do more. Burlington can't be the only place where there is one. We need to advocate for that throughout the state so that people don't come to Burlington for just those services. And we also need to, bring dignity back to people who are struggling with addiction. It is a tough thing to move through addiction, and we tend to forget that if somebody has overdosed, that they've actually lost some brain capacity, that their brain has been damaged with lack of oxygen. So the next time they're faced with a decision to make a good choice, they may not make that good choice. So these overdose prevention sites are very important to save lives and to help people who are struggling to make those right decisions and best decisions for themselves move in a new direction.
Great. Thank you both. I think we'll have time for this question here on climate change before we move into our lightning round. So the question on climate change here, Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions per capita are among the highest in the Northeast, driven largely by the heating and transportation sectors. So what is your plan to reduce Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions in those sectors? And we'll start with you, Missa.
Yeah, this is a topic dear and near to my heart as an architect. I think about reduce is the number one thing as an architect, but also knowing that not everybody has the ability to afford to efficiently weatherize their home. When I was starting my own business, we had very little income, so we were part of the CVOEO weatherization program. Come to find out, our house also had vermiculite in it. CVOEO will not touch a house with vermiculite. So there was a barrier that immediately approached us in order to get our own home weatherized. So we need to look at the systems that we have in place to provide weatherization for this old housing stock and look at the barriers to get access to these already well-established systems. So that's one. And we also need to keep the incentives for the middle income as well. So we have a lot of incentives for heat pumps and electric vehicles. We need to maintain those and increase them. I've also been the architect for several biomass plants in the state of Vermont, Copley Hospital, Norwich University, and I know I've done a little work here in Burlington with the expansion that's happening here. Burlington has the ability in the short term to really increase the efficiency of its own plant by capturing the waste steam that's coming out of there to heat the municipality buildings and the hospitals too. It's not the end-all solution, but it is a huge stepping stone and moving in the right direction. So it's a topic that I could talk on and on about.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Missa. Abby, your thoughts on climate change solutions?
Another big topic. Well, the Renewable Energy Standards Bill that passed and was, the veto was overridden, is a really important step that will provide, is really a roadmap to getting to carbon zero for the utilities, and that is really important. And transportation is a big nut, and I know that Vermonters drive many, many miles in their vehicles. And I think that's a combination of how do we help the fleet electrify? How do we, and that's, there's pieces like building the infrastructure for charging stations and making it easier to charge stations. A neighbor gave a great idea to look at legislation to help standardize charging stations, because his electric vehicle, he has like 4 different apps on his phone for different kinds of charging stations. It's not standard. They don't all speak to each other. So you may find yourself in a rural area with a charging station that you don't have an app for and you can't get power. So there's things like that I think we can look at, little things that could help. And then the other piece is getting people to drive less. I rode my electric bike here. I love my electric bike so much I would do an infomercial for free. And so I think, how do we get people using transportation methods, whether it's buses, public transportation, electric bicycles, which really can function as a vehicle when the weather's nice. I think we really need to dig in and find creative details to make it easy and to reduce the friction, to help people using technology, and help people make transitions to lower impact transportation methods.
Great, thank you both. So now is time for our lightning round questions. So these are either yes or no or very short questions, and we'll still alternate as to who's answering first.
Okay.
So the first question here, starting with Abby, should private schools be funded with public dollars?
Generally speaking, no.
No.
Missa? Starting with Missa, do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction?
Yes.
Abby?
Yes.
Should biomass, burning wood, play a role in emissions reduction strategies? Abby?
Yes.
Missa?
Yes.
It's interesting. There have been different responses on that question. That one's it's an interesting question to dig
it
into.
is.
I have a feeling.
Different ways to look at
Yes.
it. Yeah,
We'll talk about that one.
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah, I know. It's yeah.
Do you support overdose prevention centers, starting with Missa?
Yes.
Yes.
Did Governor Scott overstep his authority by appointing Zoe Saunders as interim education secretary? And as context, Zoe Saunders was voted down by the Vermont Senate and then was appointed anyway. So did Governor Scott overstep his authority? Starting with Abby.
Yeah, I think he did.
Yes.
Okay. Towards the end here, where do you get your news? Starting with Missa.
As many places I possibly can. So NPR, VPR, Vermont Digger, CNN, New York Times. I even go to Fox News just to see what the other side is. So I dabble in all the areas just because I want to see multiple perspectives and see where everybody's coming from. Yep.
Abby, where do you get your news?
Local news, mostly from 7 Days, Digger, some podcasts. Town meeting TV, I watch meetings, and I'm one of those people. And then sort of national, international news, primarily a number of podcasts and blogs, as well as New York Times and The Atlantic.
Okay, and we'll combine the last two here because we're running out of time. Do you ride the bus, and what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont? And we'll start with Abby.
Not often. I rode my bike, though. And my favorite ice cream is probably Lake Champlain Chocolate's Belgian chocolate.
Okay.
Yes, I ride the bus. I secretly wish I was a bus driver. I love riding the bus. And then my favorite ice cream has been discontinued, which was Wavy Gravy. I'm an old school Wavy Gravy, but so now Coffee Buzz Buzz is, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both so much. We'll give you about 30 to 45 seconds here for closing statements if there's anything that we didn't touch on here that you'd like to highlight. And we'll start with you, Missa, about 45 seconds.
Yeah. So thank you for having us and having this discussion. Feel free to please reach out to me. I would love to talk about these topics in more detail. As you can see, I think we share a lot of similar values. But I think I think where we differ is that I have a significantly different lived experience, and my mindset and skill set and how I will approach problems will be very different than Abbey. As I said before, I have 20 years of experience as an architect and really have honed my listening ears to listen to my clients or my constituents to really see what they need and propose solutions that work for them, not necessarily what I want. So I think that skill set is easily transferable to this position. And I also think it's worth talking about crossing the political divide a little bit. I have the progressive nomination. I'm seeking the Democratic nomination. And I think it's really important in my actions that I am really trying to let my values guide me, and that may be a combination of the two parties. So I'm actively working towards bridging those parties.
Thanks
how
so
I'm running.
much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Missa, for coming.
Yeah.
Abbey Duke, your closing statement here.
Thank you. So Chittenden 17 is a really special district. I think it has the best that Burlington has to offer. It includes the Intervale. It includes many of our best parks, Leddy Park, North Beach, Waterfront Park, Battery Park. It includes diverse neighborhoods. It includes large apartment buildings, including our biggest current development underway, which is Cambrian Rise. And it has been an honor to walk the streets and ride my bike through the streets and meet people in all those different parts of our district. I think I've got the skills and experience to bring the issues throughout the district to the state. My experience running a catering company where I meet people all the time at events. I'm also on the board of the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility on the policy committee, and I've spent the last 3 years helping to vet policy ideas and see what we should endorse. So I think that perspective of using business to further progressive values and to look at how businesses can further the public good is a really good perspective to have in the House. And so, yeah, that's it. And I guess I'll close with you can go to my website, abbeyduke.com, to reach me, and I hope to have your vote. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for joining us. Don't forget to vote on August 13th in the Democratic primary. Thanks so much for tuning in. So long.